Right, welcome back, everybody, to another TLC call. This is conversation number 77. Welcome to the TLC stage, Shiva. Shiva's here to talk to us about why hypotheses are overrated. He's going to have to convince us of that. He says that we're missing out in our process. He's going to convince us that hypotheses are overrated and tell us what we're missing in our process. So before we get started, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, as always. We're going to thank our first sponsor, Conductrix, who's been with us from the beginning. Thank you, Matt, Nate, Ezekiel, and the entire team at Conductrix. Thank you for supporting the TLC. Thank you to our TLC Connector newsletter sponsors, Epo and Chameleon. And thank you for our heckling sponsor this week, Eddie Aguilar of Blazing Growth. So let's get started by meeting Shiva. For those of you who don't know, he's an experimentation evangelist, very passionate about driving revenue, creating high value user experiences. And he's a champion of testing to learn, not testing to win. More important than that, he's winning hearts and minds one meme at a time. He's famous for his Happy Friday to everyone except hosts. And you can hear all about everything related to experimentation on the From A to B podcast. If you're not a listener, you should be. So check it out. I'm going to stop sharing and let you take over the screen share. Shiva.
Sounds good. I don't know if I should be happy or depressed that that's what I'm known for is my Happy Friday posts, but I'll take it. Oh, not that. Okay. You guys could see my screen?
Yes, sir. It's not full. There you go. Yep, now it is.
Okay. Sweet. All right. So I'm going to talk with you guys a little bit about what you're missing in your experimentation process. Before we start, Kelly, you kind of gave a very nice intro. I'm Shiva, senior program manager at Motive, doing testing for years. I make memes and I have a podcast. So let's start with a quick reaction to the room as a baseline, because I'm going to A/B test. I'm going to do a pre and post test here, which isn't a test, whatever. Hypotheses are overrated. How many of you are on the train of hypotheses are overrated right now? Love it, Kevin. Okay. Florent. Okay. Iqbal. Okay. All right. So I think I have like a solid 20% of people on the train right now. Okay. So I have some work to cover here.
Ooh, Matt Gershoff says the answer is null.
Such a nerdy answer. Okay. So let me cook. I'm going to convince you guys. I promise. I got to this conclusion by doing some data analysis, as we all love to do. In my time at Spiro, this is 2023 data, but similar trends have been observed that when we audit the programs, the average maturity is about 57% or so. But of all of the kind of like pillars between people skills, data to strategy and culture, process and governance was always the one that seemed to score the lowest of all of them. So I saw that and I'm like, why? Why is that the case? So that's where I Googled some shit and I tried to figure out what is the internet sea of experimentation. So I just searched how to A/B test, and that's how I learned how to A/B test, by clicking on articles. Article 1. I don't want to throw any shade at the individual companies. This is just what exists. HubSpot, they mentioned 7,000 words. Hypothesis was mentioned once, which is kind of wild to me, and doesn't mention the words research or problem statement at all. Not off to a great start. Optimizely, big testing tool, doesn't mention the word research once. Big bummer. Harvard Business Review. A lot of smart people go to Harvard from what I can tell. In an article that they released, research nor hypothesis were mentioned once in that article. 0 for 3. CXL, big company, shout them out a lot, really good friends with them. Pretty good. So hypothesis is mentioned 20 times, research mentioned 12 times, problem 3 times. So like, okay, I guess, like, it's not great. But maybe the audience is not that great, but like it's targeting more junior people, but not even problem statement, which I would consider a little bit more advanced. Research wasn't mentioned at all on these. So after taking like a depressing Saturday of just decompressing after reading all of this, I started to just question what is maybe the reason why these process scores are low and why we're seeing this? I think it's a process issue. So let me take a couple quick questions here. Feel free to kind of just answer, jump in, or just raise your hand. That's fine. How many of you guys use research in your experimentation program by a show of hands? Okay, see, this is what I love to see. Off to a great start. It's like, how many of you guys know how to do math? Yes, this is great. You guys know how to do 1 + 1. Great. How many of you guys will not run a test without a hypothesis in place? Most of you, right? Yeah, great. Off to a great start. I think there's some selection bias in these questions. How many of you guys will use problem statements to bolster your hypotheses? Okay, great. I might be preaching to the choir. Oh, Florent with a little iffy. I'm curious, what's your explanation for that, Florent?
Well, and I mean, I guess it goes to the like, do the people I work with use hypothesis and problem statement? Yes, but I do feel it's a bit kind of going through the motion, and so that's why I think, well, just going from 0 to going through the motion of having a problem statement and hypothesis is overrated.
Yeah.
Great, well-developed hypotheses are not overrated, but just, oh, we're going to start using problem statement and hypothesis, and suddenly we're going to get better experimentation, overrated. But if people are like, we want to do hypothesis and problem statement, I'm like, sure, let's go through the motion.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that's actually kind of a good segue into where, shocker, I want to talk about problem statements. But in this totally not made up data set of time spent on tasks, the time spent on research is generally pretty high by the poll of the room. I'm guessing most of you guys do spend up a lot of time in the research, which is great. There's probably a decent amount of time in hypothesis generation, which is great. But something is missing here. And that's where I'm saying hypotheses are overrated, because what I believe is that many people are not spending enough time in problem statements. So that's the underrated. Super clickbait. People would say hypotheses are overrated and yell at me on LinkedIn. I'll probably get hate. It's fine. But I think this is a pretty defensible statement. And this is where I'm hoping to say there's an alignment that has to be happened. That it's not saying spend effectively less time on hypotheses, but spend more time in problem statements because they are important to experimentation. So that's your missing piece. So I have a framework that I've built out. I kind of just want to walk you through my thought process here. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on this. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions, by the way. But where if you have an experimentation program testing only solutions, your program's probably dog shit. Sorry. If that's all you're doing is just like testing best practices or random shit, it's like spaghetti testing. It's probably not strategic. It's probably terrible. If it's early in your scaling and in maturity, that's fantastic. Feel free to get started here, but you have to work your way out of that very quickly. When you add hypotheses as a layer to this, it's better. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better. You're starting the motion and the wheels turning to get better at experimentation. When you add research, you're almost there. It's really good. But this is where I say problem statements is the unlock to get you as a vehicle from research into better hypotheses and more focused solutions. So that's how I approach thinking through all these things. So quick verbiage check, I guess. What's the difference between a problem statement and a hypothesis? For me, and we could quibble over this, like you might have a different definition. To Florent's point, I want to talk more about the process of this rather than like you should define a problem statement this way and do it only this way because I'm the god. No, I'm not, I'm an idiot. But you should just follow. I hope you guys think through the process of this and adapt it to what makes sense for how you guys work through things. In this way, how I define a problem statement is something that's more strategic. It can and should be linked to business objectives that will help you prioritize experimentation and help you get more buy-in. It tends to be more observation-based because it tends to be the link between the research into your hypothesis versus the actual hypothesis. You can have many hypotheses for solves for a single problem statement, and it tends to be the explanation of that problem statement and at a high level how to solve for it. Whereas the solution, where there can be many solutions for one hypothesis, that is the tactical execution, like test button color or do specific thing, or here's a design, whatever that case is. Before I go into like a quick exercise, everyone still with me? Anyone have questions or thoughts? Anyone have any challenges?
I just have to share Florence' comment that says, Shiva, you're an idiot, but you're our idiot.
I don't know if I feel good or bad about that. I'll take it as good. I'll take it as good. Thank you, Florida. I appreciate
Kevin
you.
has a question.
What's up, Kev?
Or challenge.
I like the thinking, right, to bring it back to problem statements. But this model reminds me of Teresa Torres' opportunity solutions trees. So, and problem statements sounds like there's a problem, right? And opportunities is even broader, right? Because it could also be an opportunity, right? A business opportunity, and it doesn't have to be a problem. So do I see problem statements as the same thing as what Teresa Torres calls opportunities, or is it different?
So I argued with Lorenzo on this a little bit. By argue, I mean we just had a kind of difference of opinion. I see them as like the same. Maybe I'm wrong in this. Is a problem just not the glass half empty, where the opportunity is the glass half full? Are they not two sides of the same coin, or am I wrong?
Hells?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Would we? I think we agree. I hope we agree. And I think it's a matter of semantics, like it so very often is. To me, your problem statement or your opportunity is always the first part of your hypotheses.
Yes.
Because we've seen, a huge drop off X, or because we know market Y, who is currently underserved, and we know this by So a good hypothesis either contains what you call, for me, a problem statement or a spotted opportunity to start from. And yeah, linked with a KPI. I'm so glad you pointed that out. Linked to the KPI. Hello.
Totally agreed. And I think, to your point, semantics, if you bake your problem statement into your hypothesis, that's perfect, right? I don't care about the semantics. If you follow that process of research, problem statement, hypo into solution, it's just more of that process of making sure you tick the boxes of that thought. My hypotheses tend to just be very long because it just includes everything. So yeah, if it's a semantics thing, totally fine, but I very much align Dells. All right, so this is where I want to have some fun. Okay, so let's start with a very generic problem statement exercise. So let's say remember that framework. So we have research that leads into problems, into hypotheses, into solutions. So in 1886, before the cars were invented, people were slow. I'm sorry, people were slow to like get transportation to like go places from A to B. So that's a subtle plug out to my podcast. What would be hypotheses and solutions without actually, I'm just going to go into this. I don't want to ask a question. I'm just going to say this. People thought there'd be solutions. Just give horses cocaine or give them steroids because it'll be faster, right? We need faster cars. All right, we need faster horses. If that's the way you go from research into solution, you're missing the problem statement, where in fact, the problem is not the solution is not make horses faster. It's get more efficient ways to go from point A to point B. That's the problem statement. And then we build a metal machine that's faster and better than a horse. And you build cars that go fast and trains that go fast and planes that go fast and do all these things that make it go faster and bikes. But instead, if you're just so narrowly focused on not problem statement identification, and you're just saying, all right, we have horses, make them go faster, give them Coke. Like, it might work, but there are better solutions that you should be focused on. So that's kind of a very crude approach to problem statement. Well, let's use this like actually for experimentation purposes. So let's say, for example, we have research that says analytics is telling us 1% of people make it into a lead form. That's just some basic quant data that you got. Logically, we can make a problem statement that says users are not going into a lead gen form. That's a pretty easy observation. Knowing that this is a problem statement, does anyone want to volunteer any hypotheses and related solutions to solving for this specific problem? I'm going to pick on someone if no one calls out. Nick, give me something.
Oh my. I would say that it's too early to answer the question, so I'd want more information because
What a cop out.
at this point, there's no point in doing a hypothesis yet, right? So
What a cop out.
I mean, you need to know more.
All right, that's an acceptable answer. Fine, fine, you passed the test. Kevin.
I'll save you here. The contrast of the button is not clear enough, so we need to change from blue to red.
Yes, perfect. That is a very logical action of a solution based on the hypothesis that no one's seeing it. So make it bigger or make it higher contrast. Another set is, well, the text isn't important. They're not going to the forum because they don't know what's going to happen. So change different text. I'd say this is maybe not the highest quality problem statement, but it is a valid problem statement. And maybe in some cases you would prioritize it, but maybe in other cases you wouldn't. So here's another example of a problem statement backed in that same research that you might see, and that users are not going to the forum because they're not motivated enough. You could take the greenest shade of green ever. It's not going to work. They're not motivated enough to go into that. And that's where it might lead you to a new set of hypotheses and then problem statements from there. So if we say, all right, well, they're not motivated, so make it green, make it bigger. That's not going to do anything. That's not solving the core problem statement. So not really worth testing because that's not to your problem. Instead, well, perhaps it's the why us page. The why us page is so impactful. When we see people that's where you can start actually doing some additional research to back this up. So maybe we add a secondary link to the hero and test that out and see if it gets engagement. Or the homepage copy is just so blah and uninteresting. That could be a hypothesis. Maybe you validate it with Winter. Maybe you validate it through testing other different types of copy, do user testing. So test different copy to see if you can increase the motivation. To me, this is where it really gets into the fun part of you have multiple forms of research. And as you aggregate these, as Nick's cop out ultimately leads towards this, right? Like, let's get more research. So let's say analytics tells us 1% aren't making their, and we got qualitative data saying people tell us it's too expensive. So that's a solid problem statement backed in two forms of research, not just one. And then we can make a problem statement that says, well, they're not going into it because they believe it's expensive. So then that guardrails you even more towards certain hypotheses and even, fewer solutions, which is great. It keeps you focused. So instead you build a comparison page. So you build that page and then you test it out. Or maybe it's that pricing page that you currently have is just not really doing a great job of explaining the cost savings. That's why people think it's expensive. So add more content. So it's just the frame of reference that with the problem statements, it starts to get you back steps. So you keep on having to go back to that research, and it keeps you grounded in that process of collecting a bunch of research, generating the problem statements, and even kind of doing your own mini loop of like research problem statement to start prioritizing those so that you're not just blindly testing a bunch of random solutions. So why is this ultimately actually important? I'll lay out some quick benefits here. I think I went through this way too fast, but whatever. I'll lay out some reasons why I believe this is great. So in one case, like I said, if you have just random solutions, i.e. Microsoft is doing big button colors that's green and they test a bunch of things, therefore we should just do that because they know. If it's not backed in any research or problem statements, it might be worth testing if the ROI is there, but I'd say I wouldn't generally prioritize those. But it also forces you to take steps back. So you start, instead of starting with a solution and then building your way back, you start with the research, prioritize your problem statements, and then work towards the solutions that are worthwhile. But like I kind of alluded to, you want to make sure you focus on the right problem statements linked with the business. I would make sure you're very clear that the business is aligned with the problem statements that you're trying to solve for, so that you're not busy testing, like I said, the first or the second example, like you're not testing button colors when the business is like, we don't think that's a problem. We think the bigger problem is the motivation. So test those things instead of spending time testing these things, which might actually decrease the trust in the experimentation program if that's all you're doing. When it links with a business strategy, and even if you're losing, i.e. learning a lot of things within the right problem statements, that's still a net win for the experimentation program. So it allows you to kind of keep the guardrails on and focus on what's important. But I also think it creates additional guardrails that, let's say you have a very challenging UX person and they're like, I worked at Apple and I know everything because I worked at Apple and all my designs are the best. You don't have to test it. True story. So instead, what you could do is, if you have some of these quibbles, as long as you take steps back to say, is your solution testing the hypothesis that we aligned on, the problem that we aligned on, and the research that we aligned on, you should be okay being like, fuck it, let's test it. Let's see what happens. You might be right here. But if they're testing something that's entirely unrelated, that it's a solution to a hypothesis that's not linked with the problem statement, for example, then you could take those steps and say, this is what we agree on is a problem statement. This solution doesn't solve for that hypothesis linked to that problem statement. And then if there's no alignment there, then that's when the fun happens. But it does help ground the experimentation program better and keeps more alignment there, I think. And also just be okay compromising. That's kind of the name of the game with us a lot of times. I also do think this forces strategic experimentation too. So if all you're testing is a bunch of individual solutions, I would say you're running spaghetti testing, which is it can work, but it'll probably run out of fuel very quickly. Versus, I love this framework for how I like to apply it, because not only are you thinking about the solutions within the hypothesis, within the problem statement, within the research, but within each solution, you will now have iterations. You could bake in some iterations into the design. You could bake in some iterations into the test build that you can maybe flip on very quickly while the patient's open. And if you let's say you test a solution based on that problem statement and it wins, you have a theoretically very clear idea of why it's working. And then you could test and plan out those next iterations. So that's what keeps you in that strategic experimentation. There's economy of scale. But if you're pressing the gas pedal and it's going 60 and you want to keep on going straight, the direction, just keep on going straight and hit the gas pedal a little bit more. Yep. And then I'll just run through a quick example of how this also improves hypotheses. So very fun best practice of sticky CTAs. And if this is a hypothesis, this is a terrible hypothesis, but let's just say someone comes to you and they'll submit a test in your testing submission form. And they're like, we think sticky CTAs are better because of a blog post that we read. So if we make it sticky, it will improve conversion rates. Meh. Instead, you could actually there's actually an opportunity to test out sticky CTAs. It's actually a fine test if the research backs it. So backed in the research in user testing, analytics data, and session recordings, we've noticed that there are many users who are willing to take next step actions near the middle or bottom of the page. That's kind of the research. And then into the problem statement, because no next step actions are present, users have to scroll up and take that action, and many users don't. That's the problem. And then what's the solution? Make it sticky, which will reduce friction and get more conversions. So this is kind of just, I think this is the last slide. Yeah, okay. So basically, my long story short, I believe that problem statements are incredibly important. It's not to say hypotheses aren't important. I think problem statements are incredibly important to the maturity of experimentation programs. I think it'll help you on the process side, even if not explicitly documenting it all the time. I do, and I think it's valuable. But as long as you're baking in that thought process of user research to build problem statements and prioritize them, and then use that to guardrail for hypotheses and testing those solutions, I think it'll force meaningful experimentation. It'll bring you into strategic experimentation from spaghetti testing. And ultimately, I do think you will see up levels to process and governance. Well, I think ultimately improving your overall interestingness of CRO. If all you're testing is button colors, there's so many colors you could test. But when you start getting into that strategic experimentation, I think it'll create a cycle of positivity and cycle of this is very interesting. You're generating some really cool insights for the business, because the problem statements are linked with what the business is trying to learn about. So anyway, that is my talk that I thought would be more interactive, but I think I kind of rambled for a little bit. Definitely listen to my podcast because it's awesome. and find me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and definitely Venmo me. Just kidding, don't do that. I definitely don't want people sending me money. But I would love to see a quick poll. Have I convinced others with a hand of room? I know I had like a 20% buy-in rate. Have I convinced folks that hypotheses are overrated? Assuming you're following my definition of hypothesis.
So hypotheses without problem statements.
Correct. Are they overrated?
Yes.
That's what I like to see. I'm guessing everyone that's not showing their camera is waving their arm violently in the air. Has anyone adopted
The straw
this?
man version of an hypothesis that you're presenting is overrated, yes.
And Lucas did not just crash.
I don't disagree. I know that what I did was a little bit clickbaity, but
What? You? Clickbait?
never.
A little bit.
I have to, otherwise you wouldn't be interested. Lucas wouldn't have joined us unless I said it. You were so angry and fired up to join. Mission
I totally would have
accomplished.
joined for Kelly.
Wow. Okay, I guess I'm not interesting enough, Lucas. All right. Sheesh. Radio silence. All right. I guess
Well,
I know where.
I do think though that I mean I do think you have obviously I mean I even before you may even made your point I still agree, but I do think that in a sense your point is like it's if not preaching to the choir, at least preaching to the seminary. Like the people here have been taught that.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the PMs or marketing analysts or marketing manager who are told, okay, you need to develop hypotheses, and then they develop hypotheses without problem statement, and those hypotheses are not very good, and then the program don't work, and they're like, well, that was useless to do hypothesis. I think those people would very much benefit from your statement, which is like hypotheses by themselves are overrated if you go to a problem statement.
So this is something that I started geeking out on when I was at Gartner running the programs there. And I would just get so many random test ideas. I don't want to throw any shade at individual folks, but I just get like, why is the CTA not green? Or like, why is it not sticky? Amazon, like I get so many random test ideas. And I'm like, how do I get people to think more rather than just put a bunch of shit in the pile and just like, I just have to go execute it and run all those tests. So to me, it actually fostered more thoughtful experimentation requiring this field. And then people would be like, okay, well, I have to think about a problem statement. I don't know what that means. It added a little bit of friction, but in a good way, that people actually have to think through these things rather than, you know, just simply saying, okay, I'm just going to give you test ideas, go test them.
I'm sorry, I just have to ask, Matt, are you having connectivity issues? Look at his name in the participant list. It says Gershoff tried to connect to the TLC talk again. He says
it's funny because Matt's like right down the road from me. So theoretically, Matt, you could have just drove over and hopped in the room with me.
And just so we can confirm how connected Matt is to this topic, he asked over in the TLC calls channel, I think that this is sort of standard thinking, no? To which everybody's like, no, Matt, no. This is not, sadly, this is not standard thinking.
I think a lot of times in our experimentation bubble chamber, it's like, oh, if it's statistically significant, like even stats like statistical power, SRM stuff. I'm not going to throw any shade at anyone, but someone very popular who has a testing tool didn't know what SRM was. And I'm like,
Hey, so Marilyn, do you have a question? Oh, sorry. Well, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Go ahead. You took yourself off mute. You get to go first.
Iqbal is in the like, what lighting do you have?
Bathed in light.
Glowing.
Yeah.
It's like I'm being baptized or something.
So the question, like, this is to follow on from Matt said about doesn't everybody use problem statements? And I think I might be in the same sort of situation as you, Shiva, where I work mostly with product teams. But it seems like product teams are pretty much very much problem focused anyway. So do you think there is an issue from non-product team, like from marketing and from just like individual CRO teams? Do you think there's less of a take-up of the problem statement sort of problem approach from there?
You might be right. I don't want to discount your experience. My experience with some product owners is very much ship factories, and they don't give a fuck about anything regarding problem statements. It's someone 3 levels above them told them to do this thing, so they do it. And that's a lot of that. I mean, if I would believe if you have problem statements in your product teams, you're actually you're like this close to experimentation being in your mindset. So you're probably in a good spot if those are the folks you're working with. I have not. Oh, I've worked with some and it's been great. I've worked with others who are just ship factories, and they don't have problem statement. It's literally, here's a ticket, pick this, build it, oversee the build, ship it, move on. No validation, nothing. So I'll challenge that assertion, but let's say for those who are product focused, wait, what was your question again?
His question was whether or not there's more of a take-up of the problem-focused approach within product teams because of like Marty Kagan and the product operating model, those kind of things.
There should be.
Rather than like is there do you think there is a specific problem, to use that word, within like the CRO specific agencies and communities and stuff, people who just doing CRO, people doing experimentation as part of marketing activities? Do you think there's a bigger problem there than...
You might be right. You might be right. But I will challenge and say the other side is, again, I've seen product owners who are ship factories who don't care about validation, don't care about testing, don't care about any of that. So yeah, there might be great product owners who are doing it and bad CROs that aren't. But I don't know if I could actually get it. I don't know if there's any way to actually get a survey of this, but I have seen the exact opposite. I've seen CROs who are very focused on this. Like all of us are all focused on this. And like Matt was saying, like this is kind of second nature to us, I think rightfully so. And then there are the folks who we have to convince that are product owners who don't do it. I'm curious is there any way to like actually collect this, some way of understanding how many product owners are actually care about testing and actually care about problem statements? Probably not.
Can we call on Marilyn? She's had her hand raised.
Hi.
Hi.
This is an interesting topic in itself. And I think Shiva, I've had a similar experience to you with working in product with product teams on experimentation. But I'm going to get to my statement cross question, which is, do we feel our hypotheses become stronger when we are first defining that problem statement? And another question attached to that, like maybe to everyone, are we representing our problems in our hypotheses today?
So I can answer 2 of those. I'd love to open it up to the broader team, but are we presenting them properly? Aaron Weigel's book that has all the frameworks for test scorecards and stuff like that, she bakes that as a literal line item in the scorecard. And I love that. In my testing scorecard, I also similarly have it explicitly defined. I don't think you're wrong if you bundle it up for simplicity's sake, but I like to explicitly call it out just to make sure everyone's in alignment with the problem statement. And then are we doing a good job? I personally believe hypotheses are always strengthened with a problem statement, even if they're almost worded the same. And sometimes there can be a lot of overlap. Sometimes it can be hard to be like, here's a problem. The hypothesis is solving that problem. Sometimes it can be a little bit squishy. I do think even if you don't explicitly do it, if you have that problem statement mindset, I think every hypothesis is strengthened by thinking of it. I'm curious what everyone else thinks though.
Just want to thank you for answering that.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I think one of the side effects of using the problem statement is actually one of the ways to convince people who aren't problem statement focused that this is something they might want to get on board with, in that if they're trying to get a lot of canoes to row in one direction, by focusing on the problem statement, you can get more people to be like, hey, not just CRO, but like trying to get all your different research and experimentation elements to kind of move towards one problem and make sure everyone's solving it together. The problem statement approach or learning agenda approach, or again, semantics, I've seen it in different ways, but that's usually the way I try to convince people that, hey, you, as whether you're the product owner, you're probably trying to get all of these different teams coordinated, and by focusing on problem statement and making everyone align their processes and their things to the problem statement, everyone's solving it together. But as Teresa put in the chat, like it's different people react differently. It's kind of hard to always get that buy-in.
I think that's very, very well said. It does create alignment that if we all agree that this is a problem statement that we're going to solve for, then it'll make it easier to get buy-in for the downstream tests, versus if no one agrees on problem statements, good effing luck trying to get alignment on any hypotheses or solutions, because that just exponentially grows. So very, very well said. Totally agree with that.
Lucas.
So to complete this game, let me put a statement out there and get your response. Problem statements are overrated. I think most problem statements can boil down to make number go up. And then you want some alignment around which particular number we want to make go up. But pretty much a problem statement is make number go up. And then if someone comes to you with a shitty test idea, your
That's
response
not a customer-centric
is, how
problem
does
statement.
this make number go up?
I'm
trying to make your life easy.
Yeah, so I think if you have make conversion rate go up, problem statement equals conversion rate is down, make it go up, that's a shitty problem statement.
Yes.
Versus if you're saying like customers are telling us that they don't think the cost of investment in the price is worth whatever, they think it's not worth it. Like that to me is a much stronger problem statement. You could say sometimes like, oh, 1% of people in analytics aren't going down. That was just for simplicity's sake of an example. But you could even say like, there's a bunch of people dropping off on this one step in the conversion form, and that step is specifically asking for this. And the problem we're seeing is that they're all selecting one option. I think it's on the problem statement to be good. And if you have bad problem statements, then they're overrated. But I'll flip it around and say, I think right now, hypotheses are overrated because they tend to be bad because they're not using problem statements. Checkmate.
I mean, I was going to jump in on that and say, I think you could flip the argument either way. If your hypothesis doesn't have strong evidence to support why you believe you will see the change that you're trying to bring about, then I would argue, sure, it's overrated because it's not grounded in evidence. But if you go through the exercise of taking an idea and converting it into a hypothesis rooted in a strong volume of evidence, then I would argue then maybe having it map back to a problem statement isn't necessary because it's implied or it's part of the process where you're pulling in the evidence.
That's well said.
Yeah, I like that.
Els?
Yeah, I was thinking back to basically the definition of hypothesis that I think Craig has, where, and I'll try and put it in the chat. Basically,
You mean the TLC calls channel, right, Els?
I'm well, hello. If my Slack wants to work with me on desktop, which it has not been, but I'll give it a go. So I think it looks something like this. And so the first part of the hypothesis is indeed the problem statement. And what Lucas, what you said, make number go up. indeed, that's essentially what we do. I would call that a KPI. Make number of new subscribers go up. That could be a KPI. Make number of existing customers churning go down. That could be a KPI. And you could have different problem statements relating to different KPIs depending on what you focus on. But a hypothesis without a problem statement, without that first line, is not a hypothesis. It's an idea. And it is very true. I think, Shiva, I completely agree with you. It is so problematic for so many people that they don't see the difference.
Yes.
And it's people really need to be trained on what is a hypothesis, and they need to be trained on how do you formulate a proper hypothesis. And really, we do exercises with our clients in the beginning to make sure that we don't get people, because I think the button is green and it's not very visible, I want the button to be red and then people will click. That is not a hypothesis, but it is the stuff we do, is just not as easy as it seems for everybody. It seems easy for us, but I don't think it seems that easy and evident for everybody out there.
I agree. I think it's because we hear so much, like any basic elementary science class where you're mixing two liquids together and you're like, this is going to make salt in the water or something like that. It's like the hypothesis is if then, and that's what everyone's been trained to think. Us geeks more deep into it realize it's obviously much more complicated than that. The if then has to have the precursor of research and data and all that stuff. But I think a lot of times it just means if then, and people like, I've seen templates for testing that it's just if then because, or like maybe the because is added at the end. That's kind of the research. But that's where again, like Lucas, I'm still going to hold on to this. I do think that hypotheses are overrated because people are spending the baseline amount of work to just complete a card of if then rather than spending more time in the problem statement. Like if you spend a lot of time and you do a solid problem statement, the hypothesis is like the easiest thing in the world to fill out, but it requires a slightly different frame to create that problem statement to then get into the hypo.
I mean, so one way I was thinking about it a bit earlier when we were having the debate about problem versus opportunity, and like to echo what Kelly and else was saying, that I think the operative word is neither problem or opportunity. The operative word is statement. Can you say something about the state of the world, about your consumers, about your product that is new, insightful, interesting? Like, can you make a statement that is, because like we want to increase conversion rate, there is no interesting or new or powerful statement there. It's a goal, it's a KPI, you can call it a problem statement if you want, but it's not really a statement. It's not saying anything novel about the world. And I think that is like, well, when you say something that was not obvious about the world or your consumer or your product, then you can develop better hypotheses for the product. But I think that
I'm actually now really interested in this. Am I wrong in thinking problem is the glass half full versus opportunity is, I'm sorry, glass half empty versus half full? And I tried to do this in my head. I'm like, well, if someone told me a problem statement, I could just like flip the negative sign, make it positive in that sentence, and then make it an opportunity. Like 1% of people aren't making it into a form. Problem. Opportunity. Put more people on, get more than 1% of people into the form. Like pretty simple. Or let's use a different example, right? The pricing. People think the product is too expensive. So the opportunity is we need to explain that the pricing is worth it. Like how different is the framing there? Am I wrong in that?
So I mean, one thing is that usually the way we think about it, a problem is finite. A problem has a solution and then the problem doesn't exist. And so that sense, I think in that sense, you were wrong when you were talking about horses and cars. Like people were not going slow and now they're going at the right speed. It's like there was an opportunity to go faster and then there might be other opportunities to go even faster, but this is not a finite problem. And so I think that's where, like, is it like, oh, we care about this negative value or we care about this positive value? It's like, well, is it finite or is it no? It's infinite. We just want to make it better as much as we can. So
do you think whoever designed the first car was thinking, I need to find a way to make horses faster? Or were they thinking, hey, here's some new technology that can make stuff go round and round really fast. I wonder what I can do with that. Maybe I can put it on some sort of chassis with wheels attached. I wonder what that would do. I think the first is a problem statement. The second is an opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to say that basically the whole AI thing at the moment, there's a whole world of opportunities that's opened up with AI. So there might not be an inherent problem you're trying to solve with it, but how do we take advantage of this new technology? But again, taking it back to what I was saying about product teams and the product operating model, where they kind of operate from a problem first perspective, even then they would be saying, we've got this opportunity. What problem are we trying to solve with this new application? So then even with a new opportunity, you do kind of go back to a problem where maybe there's no research that exists for a problem, but then you need to, you create a new sort of channel, almost a new feature, a new product or whatever. Then you collect research for that problem, if you see what I mean.
Right. Because the problem is, how do I get from point A to B faster? And the opportunity is, how do I use, in Lucas's scenario, the technology available at the time to do so.
But then how much overlap is between that and the hypothesis then? So like the hypothesis is we can make wheels with machines go faster, like, right? Kind of, maybe. I did think about this problem versus opportunity quite a bit. I personally ended with like, how much value is there in problem and opportunity and hypothesis? In the many cases I've tried this with, it ended up being like, I'm kind of just rewording the same thing both ways. But I'm very much open if like you guys try this out. I would love to know if you guys try this out, explicitly documenting problems and opportunities. If you guys see that it actually does help quite a bit, I'd be very interested to try that as a case study. But I think for me, it's just like, I just don't, it's a lot of work and I didn't see the perceived value when problems seem to get me like 95% of the way there.
As a behavioral scientist, I would venture a guess that in the end of the entire universe of things you could do, when you tell someone, think about problems, they would think about certain things, think about opportunities, they would think about certain things, some overlap, but not full overlap. And that's probably a situation where like, okay, your company is 1 month from being bankrupt, there are safety issues and whatnot. You're like, okay, let's take the problem lens and solve problems. When you're a startup, you're very much in the opportunity mindset. But I think at the end of the day, those are just 2 lenses about like all the things we could do. And there are situations where one lens is probably more useful than the other.
Yeah, now my gears are spinning. I kind of want to, I might update my framework on this now. This is cool. I learned something. If you guys didn't learn anything, that's cool. This is helpful for me, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, that's why we're all here, right? We learn from each other.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank Shiva and this amazing conversation, which I was expecting and enjoyed greatly. And for those of you who didn't engage over on the TLC calls, there's a whole nother Slack conversation going on that it was so much I couldn't even bring it all over here. So go over to the TLC calls channel, Shiva, because you got to go continue the conversation over there. There's more over going on over there. So and Corey just jumped into the chat. Hey Corey. So Corey Underwoods has joined the chat. But I want to remind everybody about what's coming. So May 23rd, the Experimentation Culture Awards is coming. So everybody can join the Experimentation Culture Awards. And then super exciting, the first annual Convert Women in Experimentation Conference, June 6th. So everybody join. The tickets are free. please join and support the Women in Experimentation Conference on June 6th. And then our next conversation will be with Joey Kant on July 12th. And he's going to be joining us to talk about hidden hazards when client-side experimentation issues go unnoticed. So we've got a wee bit of a break because I'll be at Marketing Analytics Summit. And then for those of you who will be with me, we'll be in Birmingham doing the TLC Mentorship Summit. Lucas, Els, see you there. They'll be on the TLC Mentorship panel with me. And for everybody else that will be in Birmingham, see you there. And for those of you that will be at the Marketing Analytics Summit in Phoenix, I'll see you there. Everybody else?
Shout outs to Kelly for
Great
organizing
weekend.
all of this and hosting the TLC, obviously.
Yes, thank you, Shiva. Thank you, everybody.
See
Have a
y'all.
great
Take care.
weekend.